Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this video, I'll be doing a beginner guide for those of you wanting to get into Age of Empires 4 but aren't quite sure how to start. It does help if you've played Age of Empires 2 before, as there's a lot of overlap in mechanics, but I wouldn't say that's essential, and any real-time strategy experience is going to transfer nicely. Keep in mind there is a single-player Art of War tutorial series that I'd recommend checking out if you're new, and it walks you through different aspects of the game. This video though is meant to be more all-encompassing and cover how to get started on the right foot and the options you have available to you in each age, so let's check it out. Now, the first thing you have to do is decide on a civilization. There's 8 of them at launch, and depending on which one you start with, there's a few unique mechanics that you'll have to learn. Probably the most straightforward if you're just starting out though is the English, and in fact the devs have even said the English were specifically designed for new players to have something familiar and more straightforward. Another reason they're good if you're new is they have a lot of defensive bonuses, like villagers who can fire arrows, twice as many town center arrows, which deters early raiding, and faster attack for your units if they're near a defensive building. Don't let that fool you though, they're also quite good at rushing as well, so if you want, you can jump straight into the action. The French are also pretty similar, but more focused on cavalry and crossbows, so if that's more your thing, then they may be a better choice. I honestly wouldn't agonize over civ choice too much though, and if any is really calling out to you, then go with that one. So now let's jump into the game and talk about how you start playing. Once you're in, you'll see you have a town center, 6 villagers, and a scout. The first steps are to queue up villagers at the town center and put all 6 villagers onto collecting sheep as close to the town center as possible. Making villagers costs 150 food per minute, but with 6 on sheep, we should easily be able to keep producing villagers constantly. Now, there really isn't too much that we can do in the Dark Age for most civilizations, and a lot of nice things become available in Feudal Age after we advance, so that's really the priority for the first 3 or 4 minutes. The ideal build order is going to change based on your civilization, but generally the sooner you can get to 8 on sheep and 2 or 3 on gold, the sooner you're going to age up. You only need a significant number of lumberjacks in Dark Age if something about your civilization demands that, or like the Rus, you can get early gold by hunting. With any civilization though, the ultimate goal is to save up 400 food and 200 gold as quickly as possible. In most cases, that's going to end up happening around 3 minutes or shortly after. Don't forget to keep your town center constantly making new villagers, use drop-off camps to keep things efficient, and to make a house every now and then. Usually, I make a house with either the first or second villager I create, and just that one house should almost get you to Feudal Age. Now, I've been talking a lot about villagers, but actually most of your attention in Dark Age is going to be spent scouting for sheep, which run very quickly behind your scout, but are incredibly slow when walking on their own. As you explore the map, you'll come across them, and when you start to get low on sheep back home, you just send your scout to drop them off. Something that can be helpful with the scout as well is to put him on a control group by using the combination Control and 1. That way, anytime you double-click 1, you'll select him, and H by default selects the town center, so it's an easy way to go back and forth between the two. Holding shift and right-clicking on the minimap to create some waypoints is also handy to free up some of your attention, as you will need to watch your villagers. I should note here that technically villagers collect a little faster from deer than sheep, but sheep don't require building a mill, so you always at least start on sheep right beside your town center to minimize the villagers' walking distance, and then mill deer and eventually berries later, as well as start adding in farms. Farms are fairly expensive to get started, but produce food forever, which makes them important as other food sources start to run out. English have some pretty nice bonuses to help them there, with farms costing half as much to build, and also produce food 15% faster if they're placed beside a mill. For most civilizations though, it's better to start with farms around your town center, so you can garrison your villagers inside if they're being raided. To garrison, you select all of your villagers and press F or the garrison key, and then click your town center. Afterwards, you just press return to work and they'll go back to what they're doing. That's probably worth practicing a couple of times when you're not under pressure, so it'll feel more automatic. Fishing is definitely a good idea as well, and in fact brings in food the fastest, but it'll set back your advance time because you'll need some extra villagers on wood. On land maps though, once you have 12 to 14 villagers, you're probably getting close to being able to advance. In this game, you advance to the next age by building landmarks, at least with most civilizations, and you're given a choice between 2. Often it's a trade-off of something more economic or defensive with something for your military, though in the case of the English, it's not so much a trade-off as a reading comprehension test. The Council Hall is definitely the way to go, at least in the current balance. Landmarks take a little over 3 minutes to build, unless you're the Chinese who build them twice as fast, but you can always speed up their construction with multiple builders. Of course, your villagers can't collect resources as they're doing that, but depending on how big of a rush you are to advance, you can decide if you want to give up some economy to build it faster. As English, for example, you might put your gold miners onto constructing it, since longbowmen only cost food and wood, and are an effective and simple opening. That said, you should continue making villagers the entire time you advance, though where you task those villagers depends on your plan. It's always a good idea ahead of time to familiarize yourself with your civilization's units and see what resources you're going to need. Gold is useful for a lot of important upgrades and is needed for a handful of early units, but a lot of these standard early units like horsemen, spears, and archers just take food and wood. But now that we've reached the feudal age, things are going to get a lot more interesting. I'll be referencing quite a bit to the English tech tree, and keep in mind some units are accessed earlier or later by other civilizations. The French and Rus, for example, get knights in the feudal age, so while it's a mostly shared tech tree, things are unlocked at different points to create some civilization identity. But now let's go through the different buildings and unit types to give you a sense of your options. Starting with the barracks, you have the spearman line, which is good against cavalry and not much else, as well as the men-at-arms line, which is more heavily armored and has higher attack, but is significantly slower and more expensive. Similarly, at the archery range, you have two main lines. The archer, which has a bonus against light melee infantry like spears, and the crossbow line, which does +6 against heavy units like the men-at-arms, knights, and lancers. This formal distinction between light and heavy units is one that didn't exist in Age of Empires 2, and there was never a unit that did bonus damage to knights, but not light cavalry, for example, though it is a pretty easy concept to pick up. And finally, at the stable, you have a similar distinction, with horsemen being good at raiding and having a bonus against archers, and the knight line, which is slower and more expensive, but much stronger. You can make scouts as well, and for some civilizations, having a few of those early on can make sense, but they're by far the weakest of the cavalry units. Notice there's a pretty sharp distinction in feudal between the goldless units, which could be described as light, and the gold units, which you could call heavy or armored. A couple of other things that become available in feudal age are the market and the blacksmith. At the market, as in previous age games, you can balance your economy by exchanging resources for gold and also create traders. To use a trader, you need to find another market to trade with, either with an ally or one of the ones that generate on the map, and just send your trader to it. They'll walk back and forth and bring back gold each time, again very similar to Age of Empires 2. Keep in mind they're kind of easy to raid, so it's a bit of a gamble early on, especially if there's a lot of enemy horsemen around. Something you could do to give yourself some protection though is to build walls. For most civilizations, there's two types: the cheap wooden palisade walls, which are useful in the early game to delay incoming raids, and the other is the stone wall, which you can add towers to and put units on top of. Stone walls can't be attacked by non-siege units, which makes them pretty imposing. Other defensive options at this stage include garrisoning in your town center to fire extra arrows, or you could make outposts, which fire an arrow for each unit garrisoned inside of them and offer a bit of protection from raids. Now, a good way to attack walls, and any building for that matter, is by using rams, though they're a little tricky to figure out at first, and there's a roundabout way you need to get to them. One of the feudal buildings you unlock is the blacksmith, where you can upgrade the attack and armor of your units, as well as research siege engineering. Once you have that tech, it allows your infantry and archers to build battering rams and siege towers in the field. Rams are quite costly and take a long time to build, but deal pretty insane damage to buildings. Now, at first, needing an extra tech and time to build them might seem like an annoying extra step and not worth the effort, but it avoids having to build a forward siege workshop or send your battering rams across the map, so arguably it even has some advantages. On the other hand, if you're more of an economically focused player, then rather than investing everything into your military, you could also add in extra town centers, which is possible as early as feudal age for 400 wood and 300 stone. Villagers pay for themselves very quickly, and having 2 or 3 times as many town centers will obviously lead to a big advantage later, if you can get away with it. Obviously, it depends on context, but a rule I like to follow is to aim for getting 80 or 90 villagers before stopping production. That's less than I like to end with in Age of Empires 2, for example, but villagers in Age of Empires 4 collect noticeably faster. Also, one last note about feudal age is to think about your upgrades. One that I highly recommend in early to mid feudal is to pick up wheelbarrow at the mill, which lets your villagers carry 5 more of any resource and move faster. It's 150 gold, so you need to save up for it, but it's a great technology. Other than that, the main thing to think about is where your resources are coming from and which ecotechs will apply best to those. If you want a quick way to check your economic buildings, you can press F2, and all the ones you've built will be grouped together and listed. You can then just cycle through them and check which upgrades you can afford and seem useful in your situation. As a similar tip, F1 does the identical thing except for military buildings and groups any of the ones that you've built. This is especially useful in the late game, where you can easily have tons of military buildings scattered around the map. So that's feudal age, where you're usually establishing your economy and getting in some early raids to put pressure on your opponent. Now let's jump ahead and take a look at the castle age. Of course, you age up the same way again with the landmark, and for the English, you get a choice between a free town center or a free keep. Again, you can see another economic versus military trade-off happening. Keeps are the strongest defensive building, and usually cost 800 stone, plus whatever you want to pay in add-ons to improve it. Being able to make keeps is one of the immediate advantages in Castle Age, and another is the ability to upgrade your existing units. For example, the Castle Age upgrade to Longbowmen adds 2 attack, 2 range, and 10 HP. If you're making a lot of Longbowmen, that's definitely worth picking up. You also get access to 2 new buildings. The first is the Monastery, which creates monks. They can be used to heal, collect relics to generate a trickle of gold inside your monastery, capture holy sites, which also generate gold and can be a victory condition, or monks can even convert units en masse if they're holding a relic. There is a countdown on that, so it doesn't work instantly, but if you see the big circle and it's not your color, either get out of there quickly or focus down the monk in the center. There's really nothing worse than losing expensive units and then also having to fight them a minute later. The other new building in Castle Age is the Siege Workshop. There's a handful of unique variations across different civs, but siege units really come down to one of 3 categories. The first is the Springald, which I think of as a type of sniper unit. It has bonus damage against siege and fires 1 really powerful bolt, making it good at taking out specific siege targets. The second is the Mangonel, which deals damage to an area, so it's best used against bunched up groups of units, though it can also do a bit of work against buildings. Then there's the Trebuchet and Bombard, which are both anti-building specialists, though you can also use them against units at times as well. There's other anti-unit siege that you might run into, but that's something you just pick up with a bit of experience. Also keep in mind that siege generally have a lot of resistance against archers and crossbows, so you'll want to deal with them by using your own siege or melee units. And finally, let's move on to the Imperial Age. Again, you age up with a landmark, and to give English as an example, you have a choice between an especially strong keep or a building that can produce a batch of units roughly every minute at a steep discount. There's only one new building unlocked in Imperial Age, which is the University. The building offers a variety of technologies to improve gunpowder, siege, cavalry, archers, infantry, and building HP. It's a bit of everything, and usually 2 or 3 will be relevant to your army composition. Other buildings like the Siege Workshop also have new technologies available in Imperial Age, so you can scan through your buildings using F1, F2, etc. and see if there's any new techs that are jumping out at you. One for the English that's worth knowing about is enclosures at the mill, which allows your farmers to generate a trickle of gold in addition to food. The Hand Cannoneer also becomes available at the archery range and is an expensive high damage unit. It doesn't have any specific bonuses against infantry or anything like that, but it can add a lot of punch to a late game army. So now that we've gone through each age and looked at the different units and buildings, let's quickly talk about victory conditions. The first and probably most straightforward is you can destroy all of your opponent's landmarks and their starting town center. Keep in mind that if you take out one, your opponent can repair it, but if you can knock out all of them at once, you instantly win the game. If, on the other hand, you're on the back foot, you can also build a wonder in Imperial Age, and if you can defend it long enough, you can win that way. The third way is to control all of the holy sites on the map for a given amount of time. You need a monk or something equivalent in order to convert them, but from what I've seen, any type of enemy unit can cause you to lose control of it. Also, to quickly touch on water maps, there aren't too many different ships that you have to learn, and generally the later versions counter the earlier ones, though they're also more expensive and take up more population space. Keep an eye out for explosive demolition ships as well, as they can take out multiple ships, units, or light nearby buildings on fire if they get close enough. With all of that said, I think we've now covered the basics. At this point now, it's just a matter of playing the game and getting experience with the different civs, units, and mechanics. I'll have some other videos that go into those things in a bit more depth, but hopefully this gave at least a decent introduction to the game and a place to start. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.